Hello and welcome. We start our action week actually with a brief address with the Commissioner of Voluntary Organisations to the theme we chose about senior citizens and sustainability. Welcome, Mr. Jesmond Saliba. It's an honor for us to have you with us. And
thanks for the invitation. It's possibly actually my first public event which I'm addressing since my appointment as Commissioner for the Voluntary Organisations, a vibrant sector in Malta, which I come from as well, but also addressing a particular reality which I think it's important that we look at from the wider context, from a wider perspective.
Mm-hmm.
At times, the term poverty is defined on the basis of who sees it and how one acknowledges it. And more often than not, the definition risks to be subjective in a way. And the lack of objectivity in the definition gives room for interpretation, which varies. And as such, like in other aspects of life, what might happen is that we use an umbrella term, poverty, senior citizens, disabled people, various umbrella terms, which helps us to isolate the issue, yet aggregate the problem, rather than simply address the issues from a perspective which is needed to be seen from the various aspects. And I think one point which life taught me, both in my journalistic experiences in the past and also my involvement in social organizations through my role as a volunteer in the past years, is that at times we need to overcome the challenge that we address issues from our point of view rather from the point of view of who we are serving, of who we are supporting. So if poverty is something which needs to be seen and addressed, we need to have a clear understanding and definition of who are the poor, what's contributing to poverty. I'm not saying that this is a question which doesn't have answers, but understanding the answer at times can help us perhaps more in being effective in our approach. And this same effectiveness needs then to be seen, how to be applied on who will be addressing the aspect. At times, we look at poverty from the financial perspective. And obviously, there is that feature in the concept, so in what constitutes poverty. But I think over the past months, due to the pandemic, the term poverty got a new, wider, and personal dimension. Now, this in itself gives us a challenge, because ultimately we need to see how to be effective. And at times, from the sector I come from, but also from other aspects which I see, we tend to create initiatives and engage in projects which cater for particular needs to address the concept of poverty, but at the same time, create applications in terms of efforts. Now, efforts require funding, and we're also witnessing challenges in that perspective, both in the flow but also in the relevant monitoring and also administrative aspect of it. So I think one of the biggest achievements that we can have going forward, even to look at a dimension which is European, which helps us to be sustainable in the level of operations that we carry and do, we need to evaluate going forward how to create partnership with relevant stakeholders and realize the fact that the state on its own can do such things, the state with reliable partners coming from the social sector can do so much things, and the civic society can do so many things. But if together they join the forces within a strategic framework, then we can address possibly the various realities which require to be addressed in a more efficient and effective way. We also, I think, need to look at what's coming next rather than try to use, take initiatives to address what is now. The now is here, but, and we're not necessarily covering it, but if we implement projects which are focused on what is now, we end up backpedaling again in a year or two, anticipating problems, anticipating societal needs, anticipating the needs of this important cohort of society is also a crucial dimension of where our actions should be focused on. And as one of the first decisions that I took in office is that we will be engaging with the academic world to carry a thorough research on the basis of which we try to anticipate what are those societal needs which will need to be addressed by civil society and the public sector in conjunction with possibly even the private sector. So the need, as an example, of the caring services for a particular cohort of society due to demographics, it needs to be taken care of, and there are these players already doing it. How can you harness it to be ready for tomorrow? Not to be able, not to have the need to catch up. It's a challenge, of course, because realities always remain those that we are, and we have to deal with the realities of today. And the rate with which realities are changing, the situation is evolving, requires attention as well. So it is important to harness everyone's role in addressing such needs, because it's only like that that we create a common good feel, common good factor, and a common good approach. Everyone has a role, everyone has a function, and we understand how we can contribute towards this need and common good approach. And I'm saying this because obviously this also poses a challenge at times in our way of seeing things and mentalities, because creating synergies is perhaps one of the toughest processes to achieve, but it's worth the effort because the yield then is great. And I think this is also a way of seeing things, which will be also needed to look forward, so that we see how we can provide an additional safety net for people in poverty or at risk of poverty, and in other areas as well, in other areas where we can address, including extended education, extended formation, preparing the generations of tomorrow, and other pockets, cohorts of society which need to be addressed. We also need to look at the fact of the demographic shifts that are taking place in our country. And these demographic shifts relate to both age, but also in terms of nationalities and cultures that we have in our country. And I think we have a number of organizations, our kaleidoscope of organizations in Malta, who cater for the various communities to retain a level of engagement, a level of promotion, a level of support in these areas which we have, but also at the same time we need to find the ways that perhaps these same platforms, these same organizations, these same formations kick off a process to bridge between themselves. Because ultimately, I think one of the main issues that will always remain is that it's easier to create walls than bring them down. And this has been shown by history. It's a lesson we learned by history. And unfortunately, we're not too keen to remember what went on in society and in life. We're witnessing this reality across the continent and beyond. And I think this needs to be addressed and also left. Another important point that I think one also needs to understand is that the way the situations are evolving around the globe, and not exceptionally in Malta, maybe in Malta we read a lot about them, etc., is that even the regulatory frameworks within which we operate are also changing dramatically at a very fast rate. And I think if I had to highlight where we stand at this stage, we are, as I said, at a crossroad, which is not necessarily clear where the path will lead us. And this is the lack of clarity doesn't come from lack of direction, but the clarity is because it's coming from the rate with which things change. So I think one of the other aspects which I'm looking forward to kick off in the coming days is a reflection process where even the entire civil society wants to establish itself to be. I think there is space and room for a number of organizations, for a number of activities, which will have a redefined purpose. And I think this is the crucial message. The law establishes the need that we look at organizations which have a purpose. I think that more often than not, we create purposes to stay on paper. Like if you look at corporate organizations with mission statements, vision statements, but then how to translate it into a living culture.
Absolutely.
This is what will define, and this is in the corporate world, they're embarking on that route. Mm-hmm. And I think now we are embarking on this process in a very good so we will start embarking on this process to start to look at purpose. Mm-hmm. Purpose of why we are here and where exist, and combining this with the need to leaving no one behind, I think is one of the most onerous purposes which we can engage in the acts that we undertake, obviously with the aim of leaving what we've been given a better place.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. Actually, what I understand from what you said is we have to have a systemic collaborative approach with planning for the future examining the now, the ground we are standing on, taking into consideration everything that is going to happen right now, including also, for example, the generational gap, which is actually widening due to the digital divide that is coming up right now. And for example, focusing on what is concrete now and how projects can be developed on the concrete issues we are facing. So I think that is a very important issue to examine thoroughly through research, to identify the issues we need to tackle precisely, as I understood from you. Then there is also our organization, for example, we work for bridging the gap between the local and the migrant communities, bringing them together. Because at the moment, as it stands, there is a lot of help out there for different purposes, but we want to create cohesive communities. It means to say integrated communities, inclusive communities. We want to create a dialogue between the opposites and help, for example, eradicate stereotypes, help eradicate preconceived notions communities have about each other and how we can learn from each other. So I think what you said is very, very helpful to direct our vision to where we want to go and where we need to go as a VO.
I think it is an interesting phase that we are going to embark on, because ultimately I spoke about purpose, and this is my purpose, and I'm trying to extend that purpose to as a vision to look at and address those aspects. I am one who come from a context where we can't do things if we're on our own. And I think even from a VO reality times, the need to survive leads you to instinctively pushes you to think yes. And I think this is an instinctive reaction to reality phase when we have challenges of this kind. Because survival at times pushes us beyond our logic. When at times possibly the most logical decision is to address things collectively and see how to address things collectively. And there is the effort. Once the understanding of that effort, then we shall to address this aspect. I understand we are facing a number of challenges, not the least of a regulatory perspective. I understand the administrative realities that are being faced. These didn't happen overnight, but we're feeling the effect overnight. And in view of this, we need to be careful at addressing the things in an effective way.
Absolutely.
So all these brings us to look at the role which I represent here, which is both regulatory, but it's a dimension of promoting, it's a dimension of defending, it's a dimension of sustaining. One needs to see that any regulatory perspective that is being addressed and taken into consideration is one which is aimed to strengthen the sector and deter those who look at the sector as a vehicle for. My experience, by and large, is there are so many well-meaning individuals and organized people who put passion in what they do. It's to shield those from those who look at it differently. So we're in this together within a wider context of strengthening all and dimension and the function of a sector, which I believe, given its nature, it is at times, in people have this term, which translated is amateurism, dilettante, amateur. When in reality, I use the word, it's passion. There are people who are passionate about what they do, and they are anything but amateur in the approach and service they offer. I think this is the shift also that we, as regulators or people in organizations who take decision making, needs how to look at these functions and these roles so that we value that, and through the value, increase the appreciation.
Absolutely, that is very true, Commissioner. And what I observe as well with the new regulations and with the time, with the spirit of the time, we as NGOs, we need to develop different skill sets. As it is now, and the demands there are now, we cannot operate on our own. For example, we need boundary spanners. We need to work together. For example, to collaborate with professionals who have the skill set that, for example, administrative, that we can abide by regulations, to work together with different professionals, as a matter of fact. For example, with the legal profession, which is now very much required, where many of us volunteers do not have a simple clue how to approach that fact. So it is very important to really learn to reach out and to bridge the gap, get out of the siloism, out of an isolated idea, and work together and share a sort of a potential. With that, we can grow and we can strengthen, because I think the time is over when VOs work in isolation. Because I think together we are sitting all in one boat and everybody wants to help. And I think people can complement each other with their skill sets. So, and I think with that, we can really create a healthy voluntary sector in joining forces together, because after all, it's the communities we are serving.
I think we keep the community we serve, the people we serve, the people we're trying to alleviate, the people we need to support, at the center of our purpose.
Absolutely.
Will drive our passion in that direction. My recent past, I was involved in a number of VOs which all act and work directly in the social sector, from shelters for people suffering from domestic violence to children who require shelter and protection and safeguarding, and also to people with disabilities. And the decision I always took in taking those paths was inspired by the fact that if we don't act towards those who need, destiny of people is basically decided at best. If we don't act and support certain people and make them as our focus, and this is what gave me these experiences. They gave me the experience, and they contributed to experiencing the fact that we as human beings can learn so much and get so much by learning to appreciate how we can be of a service to others. And in the process, we also are served. Now with one much it's too romantic in approach of how we look at it. One can say that this is too idealistic. Unless you live it, remain so. I mean, and I've been blessed to say that I witnessed it and I lived it firsthand. So, I mean, we need to think of who we are making difference. And you are defining here the issues of migration. I know that an element part of the sector is also related to aging reality.
Yes.
You know? And the pandemic showed us how we label this category of people as vulnerable. When we used to hear the media briefings, the medical briefings, the communications, we created a label. Those who are vulnerable. And I used to feel, I have my parents who had to stay homebound and close for so these things. And the term vulnerable, rather than term at risk, possibly, created a new label that rather than seeing how we're protecting, we're isolating. We're doing it as a protection, but to create the new isolation. And there it created a new level of poverty. The new poverty defined of loneliness, the poverty which comes from lack of digital awareness or knowledge, the poverty which creates or comes from the fact that they lost social. I remember, I don't mention it because it was one of the radio broadcast interviews that I had during the pandemic with President Emeritus Ugo Mifsud-Bonnici, who said not even during the war it was so tough.
No.
From the perspective that at least during the day we could go and meet near the church or restaurant. And that is where we started to learn the revaluing the role, the interaction, human contact, personal touch, personal relations. A basic which we took for granted. And what I'm afraid is that time passed. We're 2 years almost of this pandemic, or a year and a half. It's a new reality which hit us. I believe that I'm not medical, but I believe it's here to stay. We need to learn how to adapt and live with it. But I'm afraid that the urge to get to normal, we possibly already forgot the lessons which we all thought were there, including the importance of looking at all cohorts of society, including those we deemed as vulnerable, and reevaluate their contribution, reevaluate how they can still contribute. I mean,
Absolutely.
they are to me bastions of survival in a positive way, because we might not, we are saying my age generation and my children's generation and those slightly older than me might not necessarily realize how much they suffered in silence. And this concept also made me think back when I used to use my other profession, which was broadcasting. You engage there and you realize, I mean, how much it hurt to be seen like we're burdened, or and that it was meant to be the other way around, and it was seen maybe as much, but the reality is that the efforts were all focused to protect that cohort and that level. So again, new poverty, the definition of poverty, relative poverty, it's not just financial. And I mean, we just need to even read what happens abroad and realize where we are and where we stand. So there's not much many can do. We all have different roles and functions, and we'll address that obviously in those respective perspectives.
Mother Teresa once said, poverty starts in the minds of people. And the poverty, the financial poverty in itself is actually a manifestation of all of it, of our behavior and of our misbehavior, so to say, for the common good. Because truly we could eradicate poverty if just everybody does his or her own bit. That's my personal belief. And I think what is also very important, the focus of this year's Action Week in Malta is the youth. What is very, very important is to bring the young and the old together. because the elder generation stands on a wealth of knowledge. And I personally, I do not feel that this wealth of knowledge and experience is adequately used or utilized for the benefit. It's not anymore. We speak at risk, at needy, but where do we empower elderly or senior citizens in that sense to have a meaning in society, to contribute to society? Because I strongly believe, I mean, I'm also part of the aging. I'm now 63. So I see, where do I want to go when I'm 80? If I manage to remain healthy and still contributing, life hasn't stopped with 50 or doesn't stop with 40. It starts. Maybe there is a different direction, but so when we need, for example, when we need care and when we are sort of more disabled, but the brain is not disabled. So there is still part and parcel where we can live in society, as a group of aging population as well, And I think it's very important to bridge the youth with the senior citizens.
I think we also need to understand this and the new realities youths are facing. I'm a father of two pre-teens. I find the challenge at times to understand their realities, and we tend to minimize possibly their challenges and realities because of our experience. And more often than not, that minimization of those problems and realities, because with the benefit of hindsight, we have experience in seeing it, makes them more lonely when they are faced with adversity. And I think it serves us as well that we look how we can contribute through this wealth of experience to understand the challenges and realities. I mean, I'm saying this because I could see this at home and within the friends of my own children. How did the pandemic shift what was normal? And at a particular age, redefining what's normal. And I think at times we and this is perhaps critical in this perspective. In England, there was a phase where my generation used to be called the sandwich parents. We're parenting, and at the same time, we have to start to take care of our parents. We are in that role and in that perspective, and we need to care for those with different ways. Like this pandemic led us also to understand our own requirements. So I think the intergenerational support, more than anything, is required across the board for everyone to grow. And I think the concept of everything is dignity. I think we cannot treat anyone as a label without seeing the person behind that label. Everyone has a right to live in a dignified way. So how are we going to foster an environment, catalyze this aspect to achieve it?
Yeah.
How are we going to achieve it? Everyone has a role, everyone has a function, and the young don't need to expect their parents to do everything for them, as much as the parents don't need to expect everything from their grandparents. I mean, one needs to appreciate that one of the biggest issues that was created with the pandemic was, with whom going to leave the kids after school? Because there was a parking place and our parents. Is it just that? Now that we got used to adapt accordingly, Are we giving the right attention and purpose to our parents beyond what they serve us? And this goes on and on. I mean, how are we creating? We are blessed as a country of being closely knit, tightly knit. The geography, as much as suffocating, can be a blessing, being so close and so small. So I think we need to harness as well those aspects which made our unique reality, and build on. I think we spoke about many aspects, but it all boils down to people who serve and people who we serve. And I think with this at the center, that we're talking about people and not numbers, beyond labels, I think we can start to look at things in a different way.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. That was a very enriching conversation we had. And I appreciate your time. It is very important that for us to be able to do all of that, to connect. And to learn how to connect and how to learn to understand otherness. And as you very well said at the very beginning, that we often want to help how we want to help from our perspective, and not disregarding sometimes what's really out there. So I think it's very important that we move from that ethnocentric or from that egocentric perspective to really develop the right empathy to see and understand what's out there.
Thank you. It was
Thank
a pleasure
you so
to
much.
be part of this, and wish you best of luck in this event.
Thank you for your kind support. Thank you. Good day.